The new Duchess of Blackwood burned a letter at breakfast. She did it with a practiced, almost bored elegance, holding the corner of the thin paper to the candle flame on the silver tray until it caught. A curl of black ash twisted in the air, smelling of soot and secrets. She dropped the burning scrap into an empty porcelain teacup and watched it consume itself. Across the vast expanse of polished mahogany, her husband, Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, watched her. His face was a mask of polite indifference, a skill he had perfected over 5 years of a marriage that felt more like a treaty than a union. Beatrice, his second Duchess, had a penchant for small, quiet acts of destruction. It was one of the many things about her he had learned to ignore, but his son was not ignoring it. Thomas sat beside him, a small, straight-backed figure in a starched collar. At 10 years old, the boy had already learned the heavy silence of the Blackwood breakfast table. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, his gaze usually fixed on his plate. But today, his fork was still. His eyes, the same startling cobalt blue as Alistair's own, were locked on the smoldering remains in the teacup. There was something more than childish curiosity in his expression. There was knowledge. "A solicitous note from a friend," Beatrice said, her voice smooth as cream. She waved a dismissive hand, the diamonds on her fingers catching the morning light. "Full of dreary gossip. Hardly worth the postage." Alistair gave a non-committal grunt and returned to his kedgeree. It was tasteless, like most things in his life had become. The silence settled again, thick and suffocating. It was the sound of his world, the clink of silver on porcelain, the rustle of a newspaper, the distant ticking of a grandfather clock counting out the seconds of his gilded, empty existence. It was only later, when Beatrice had swept from the room to consult with the housekeeper about a menu for a dinner party he had no desire to attend, that Alistair felt the weight of his son's stare. "Father!" The voice was quiet, but it cut through the room's oppressive hush. Alistair lowered his newspaper. Thomas was looking at him, his young face uncharacteristically grave. "She burned it," Thomas said, a simple statement of fact. "So, I saw," Alistair replied, his tone clipped. He did not like discussing Beatrice, especially not with his son. It felt like a betrayal, though he was no longer sure of what or to whom. "It was not gossip," Thomas continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He leaned forward, a conspirator in his own home. "It was from a village, Saltwick, on the coast." Alistair felt a strange, cold prickle on his skin. Saltwick, the name meant nothing to him. "How would you know that, Thomas?" The boy's gaze darted toward the door, ensuring they were alone. "I saw it, before she took it from the post tray. I read it." Alistair's apathy began to fray at the edges. A disquieting curiosity stirred in its place. His son was not a liar. He was a quiet, methodical child, a reader of books, not a spinner of tales. "You should not read other people's mail." The rebuke was automatic, the hollow echo of a father's duty. Thomas ignored it. His focus was absolute. "It was for you, addressed to His Grace, the Duke of Blackwood. She took it before you came down." He paused, his small chest rising and falling with a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to speak a sacred text. "I remember the words." Alistair waited. The clock in the hall seemed to stop ticking. "It said," Thomas began, his voice a low, careful recitation, "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion of a humble stranger. For 5 years I have kept a promise, but my conscience can bear it no longer. You were told a lie. She is not gone. She lives, in Saltwick, by the sea. She calls herself Lara. She has a son, a small boy with the Duke of Blackwood's eyes." The room tilted. The air grew thin and sharp, smelling of beeswax and old stone and a life he thought was buried. Alistair stared at his son, at the earnest, worried face that was a miniature of his own, and saw not a child, but a ghost of a memory, of a woman, of a betrayal so complete he had never thought to question it. Ilara, his first wife, the Duchess who had vanished, the woman who had, according to the damning evidence Beatrice had so sorrowfully presented him, abandoned her husband and child for a stable hand, disappearing into the sordid underbelly of the continent, the woman he had mourned, then hated, then painstakingly erased from his life. "A boy," Alistair repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "With my eyes." "Yes, father," Thomas whispered. "That is what it said. That is why she burned it." Alistair pushed his chair back, the screech of wood on the polished floor a violent sound in the funereal quiet. He walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back to stop them from shaking. Outside, the manicured lawns of Blackwood Park rolled away in a sea of perfect, suffocating green. For 5 years, he had been the master of this domain, a powerful duke, a man of wealth and influence, and for 5 years he had been a fool, a blind, arrogant, grieving fool. The letter was gone, but the words remained, branded into his mind by the voice of his son. He had accepted the narrative presented to him, because it was easier than confronting the jagged edges of his own failure. He had been a cold husband, a distant man, consumed by the duties of his title, leaving Ilara to languish in the lonely splendor of his ancestral home. He had given her jewels, a title, a place in society. He had not given her himself. When Beatrice, his recently widowed and sympathetic cousin, had arrived to stay, he had welcomed the buffer she provided. He had allowed her to become Ilara's confidant, never noticing the subtle poison she dripped into his ear, the careful way she isolated his wife, painting her as melancholic, unstable, and flighty. When the evidence of Ilara's affair had surfaced, a series of passionate, forged letters discovered in her abandoned rooms, Alistair's pride had been a raw, gaping wound. It was easier to believe in her betrayal than in his own emotional neglect. He had let his grief curdle into a hard, unforgiving rage. He had instructed his solicitors to be discreet, to bury the scandal. He had declared her, to the world and to himself, as good as dead. A year later, once a respectable period of mourning for his lost wife had passed, he had married Beatrice. He had told himself it was for Thomas, to give him a mother. It was a lie. It was for the sake of order, of continuing the bloodline, of filling the echoing void Ilara had left behind. But the void had never been filled. Beatrice was a perfect duchess. She ran his homes with flawless efficiency. She was a brilliant hostess. She was decorative and deferential and utterly, chillingly hollow. Their marriage was a pristine, empty shell. Now that shell had a crack in it, a tiny fissure, created by a burned piece of paper and a child's perfect memory. He turned from the window. Thomas was still watching him, his small hands curled into fists on the tabletop. The boy had lived with the lie as well. He had been told his mother had left him, that she had not loved him enough to stay. Alistair felt a surge of shame so profound it nearly buckled his knees. What damage had he, in his blind acceptance, done to his own son? "Thomas," Alistair said, his voice rough, "you will not speak of this to anyone, not to your governess, not to the servants, and especially not to her grace." Thomas nodded, his expression solemn. "I know." Alistair walked back to the table and knelt before his son, an act so foreign it felt like breaking a law of nature. A duke did not kneel. He placed his hands on the boy's narrow shoulders. The fabric of his jacket was stiff, but underneath, Alistair could feel the fragile warmth of his son. "Thank you," he said, the words heavy and inadequate. He was not just thanking him for the information. He was thanking him for being the keeper of a truth he himself had discarded, for being the one person in this house of lies who had seen something and believed it mattered. He stood and walked out of the dining room, leaving his breakfast, his newspaper, and the last 5 years of his life sitting cold on the table. He did not know if the letter was true. He did not know if some cruel trick was being played upon him. But for the first time since Alara had disappeared, he felt something other than the dull, persistent ache of apathy. He felt a flicker of terrible, agonizing hope. And beneath it, a slow, burning rage, not at the woman he thought had betrayed him, but at himself, for being the kind of man who could be so easily deceived. His investigation began not with solicitors and agents, but in the dust and silence of the past. He unlocked the wing of the house that had been hers. Beatrice had wanted to redecorate it years ago, but Alistair had forbidden it, one of the few commands he had ever given her that she had not been able to circumvent. He had told himself he was preserving the decorum of a house in mourning. He now understood he had been preserving a crime scene. The air in Alara's chambers was stale, thick with the scent of dried lavender and regret. Everything was just as she had left it, or more accurately, just as he had been told she had left it. A velvet shawl was draped over a chair. A book of poetry lay face down on a small table, its spine broken. On the dressing table, amidst the silver-backed brushes and crystal perfume bottles, sat a small, velvet-lined box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on the faded silk, lay her wedding ring, a simple band of Welsh gold. He remembered her leaving it there. It had been presented as the final, damning piece of evidence. A wife who leaves her ring behind has left her husband, her marriage, her vows. He had stared at it then, and the sight of it had cemented his certainty. Now he saw it differently. A woman fleeing for her life might not have time for sentiment, or perhaps she had left it as a message he had been too proud and too wounded to read. He spent hours in that room, touching the objects she had touched, trying to remember the woman he had married, not the phantom he had constructed. He remembered her quiet intelligence, her wry sense of humor that she rarely showed in public, the way she would arrange flowers with a focused, artistic intensity. He remembered the look in her eyes during their last few months together. It was not the look of a woman consumed by a passionate, illicit affair. It was the look of a hunted animal. He had mistaken her fear for guilt. His memory turned to the forged letters. Beatrice had found them, her face a mask of tragic sympathy. They had been crude, passionate, and utterly unlike the elegant, thoughtful prose he knew Alara wrote. They spoke of clandestine meetings with a man named Rory, a groom who had conveniently vanished the same week Alara disappeared. At the time, blinded by humiliation, Alistair had not questioned their authenticity. Now they seemed absurdly theatrical. He summoned his solicitor, Mr. Gable, a man whose family had served the Dukes of Blackwood for a century. Gable was discreet, precise, and possessed a mind like a steel trap. Alistair did not tell him about the burned letter or his son's revelation. He simply stated that he wished to reopen the inquiry into the Duchess's disappearance. Gable's eyebrows, formidable gray things, rose a fraction of an inch. "Your Grace? After all this time?" "I have reason to believe the initial investigation was incomplete," Alistair said, his voice flat. "I want you to find the groom, Rory. I want you to find the stationer who sold the paper the letters were written on. I want you to find every servant who was on duty in the Duchess's wing during that week. Interview them again. Offer them money. A great deal of money. I want to know who saw what, and who was paid to see nothing." Gable's expression became one of professional concentration. He saw not a grieving husband, but a client with a task. "It will be difficult, Your Grace. 5 years is a long time. People move on, memories fade." "Then unfade them," Alistair commanded. He went to his safe and removed a sheaf of papers. They were the letters. He had kept them, locked away like a vial of poison. He handed one to Gable. "And have this handwriting analyzed by the best expert in London. Compare it to the Duchess's personal correspondence. And," he added, a cold knot tightening in his stomach, "compare it to the handwriting of my cousin, Lady Beatrice." The solicitor took the letter without a flicker of emotion, but Alistair saw a new understanding dawn in his shrewd eyes. The pieces were beginning to click into place for him, too. While Gable began his quiet, methodical work in London, Alistair made his own preparations. Saltwick, a small fishing village on the North Sea coast. It was a place of wind and salt and hard lives, a world away from the manicured perfection of Blackwood. He pictured Alara there. The image was impossible, a discordant clash of silk and rough-spun wool. The Duchess, he remembered, would not have survived a week. But the woman who had looked at him with hunted eyes, perhaps she had more resilience than he had ever given her credit for. He told Beatrice he was traveling to Scotland to inspect one of his more remote estates. It was a plausible lie, and she accepted it with her usual placid smile, reminding him to wrap up warm. Her solicitude felt like a spider's web. He traveled not as a duke, but as a gentleman of modest means, taking only one trusted valet and a plain carriage. The journey was long and uncomfortable, the roads growing rougher, the inns more rustic, the farther north he went. The landscape changed from rolling green hills to stark, windswept moorland that fell away to a gray, churning sea. The air itself felt different, sharp and clean, scouring the cloying perfumes of London from his lungs. He felt a strange sense of liberation in the anonymity. No one knew him as Your Grace. He was just a man in a dark coat, his face grim, his purpose a secret. The layers of his title, of his duties, of the crushing weight of expectation, began to peel away. Underneath, he was just Alistair. And Alistair was a man looking for his wife. Saltwick was exactly as he had imagined it. A cluster of stone cottages huddled together against the relentless wind, a small harbor filled with fishing boats, the air thick with the smell of salt, fish, and coal smoke. It was a place that had no time for pleasantries. It was raw, real, and unforgiving. He took rooms at the only inn, the Anchor, a sturdy building whose windows were clouded with sea spray. The innkeeper was a broad, weather-beaten man with a suspicious squint. Alistair asked for a private parlor and a quiet word with the man's wife, who, according to his discreet inquiries on the road, managed much of the village's affairs. Martha, the innkeeper's wife, was a woman carved from the same hard stone as the village itself. Her hands were red and chapped, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. She looked at Alistair's fine, though deliberately plain, coat and his clean fingernails, and she waited. "I am looking for someone," Alistair began, his heart hammering against his ribs. "A woman. She may call herself Laura." Martha's face remained impassive. "Lots of women in Saltwick, sir. Can't say I know a Laura." The lie was smooth, but her hands, which had been busy polishing a pewter tankard, stilled for a fraction of a second. It was all the confirmation he needed. "She would have arrived about 5 years ago," Alistair pressed on, keeping his voice even. "Alone, in distress." He hesitated, then made a choice. He would not use his power. He would use the truth. "She is my wife." Martha's expression hardened. "If she's your wife, sir, you've a strange way of showing it. Leaving her to fend for herself all these years." The accusation hit him with the force of a physical blow. It was the truth. He deserved it. "I was told. I was led to believe she was gone, that she had left me." He looked the woman in the eye. "I was a fool. I believed a lie meant to part us. I am here to make it right." The innkeeper's wife studied him for a long, silent moment. She was weighing him, judging him. He saw in her eyes the fierce, protective loyalty of a woman who understands the hardships of another. "Making it right isn't as easy as showing up 5 years late," she said, her voice softening slightly. "She's built a life here, a good one, a hard one. She's not the woman you remember." "I am not the man she remembers either," Alistair said quietly. Martha let out a long sigh, a sound of weary resignation. "She does our laundry, lives in the small cottage at the end of Cliff Lane. The one with the blue door. She fixed him with a final, warning glare. Don't you go hurting her again, sir. She's had more than her share of that, and she's not alone this time. He knew what she meant. The boy with his eyes. He walked through the winding, narrow streets of Saltwick, his polished boots loud on the cobblestones. The wind whipped at his coat, carrying the cry of gulls. He felt exposed, stripped of his title and his certainty. He was just a man walking toward a reckoning. He found the cottage. It was tiny, built of dark, sea-stained stone, with a small patch of garden where a few hardy greens fought against the salty air. The door was painted a faded, peeling blue. A thin plume of smoke rose from the chimney. It was a world away from the grandeur of Blackwood, from the gilded cage he had kept her in. He saw her before she saw him. She was in the small yard behind the cottage, hanging laundry on a line. The wind pressed her simple, worn dress against her body, outlining a figure that was thinner, harder, but still achingly familiar. Her hair, the same shade of warm honey he remembered, was tied back in a simple knot, stray strands whipping across her face. Her hands, pulling wet sheets from a wicker basket, were red and raw. This was Alara, the Duchess of Blackwood, a laundress in a village at the edge of the world. And then he saw the boy. He was small for his age, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, with a mop of unruly dark hair. He was chasing a stray cat, his laughter a bright, clear sound against the roar of the sea. He stumbled and fell, and when he looked up, his face smudged with dirt, Alistair's breath caught in his throat. It was like looking at a portrait of himself as a child. The same dark hair, the same stubborn set of his jaw, and the same startlingly blue eyes. The Duke of Blackwood's eyes. Thomas's recitation echoed in his mind. The letter had been true, every devastating word of it. Alara turned at the sound of her son's laughter, a soft, maternal smile on her face. It was a smile he had not seen in years. It transformed her, erasing the hardship and weariness, revealing the woman he had first fallen in love with. Then her gaze drifted past her son, up the small lane, and she saw him. The smile vanished. The color drained from her face. The sheet she was holding slipped from her fingers and fell to the muddy ground. She froze, her body rigid, her expression one of utter, terrified disbelief. It was the same hunted look he had seen in her eyes all those years ago. But this time, it was not fear of an unknown threat. It was fear of him. He took a step forward. Alara. His voice was a raw whisper, lost in the wind, but she heard it. She flinched as if he had struck her. The little boy, Finn, stopped his game and ran to his mother's side, clutching her skirt. He stared at Alistair with wide, curious eyes. His eyes. "Go inside, Finn," Alara said, her voice tight and strained. She did not take her eyes off Alistair. "But Mama—" "Now, Finn!" she commanded, her tone sharp with a panic that lanced Alistair's heart. The boy, startled by her tone, gave Alistair one last, wary look before scurrying into the cottage and shutting the blue door behind him. They were alone, 2 figures separated by a few yards of muddy ground and 5 years of lies and pain. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Her voice was cold, brittle. There was none of the gentle, cultured cadence of the Duchess he remembered. This was the voice of a woman who had fought for every scrap of her existence. "I came for you," he said, the words sounding foolish and inadequate. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her. "For me? You are 5 years too late for that, Your Grace." The title was a weapon, a shard of ice meant to drive him back. Or have you simply come to survey the full extent of my degradation before you return to your perfect life and your perfect new wife? The venom in her words was justified. He deserved every drop of it. "Beatrice is not—" he started, then stopped. How could he explain the complex web of deceit in a few short sentences? How could he undo 5 years of silence? Elara, I was wrong. I was deceived. Deceived? She took a step toward him, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury that was more alive than any emotion he had seen in her during their marriage. You were not deceived. You were relieved. You had a difficult, melancholic wife who was an embarrassment to you. And suddenly, you had the perfect excuse to be rid of her. A sordid little affair. It was all so convenient. It was a lie, he insisted, his voice rising with desperation. The letters were forgeries. The groom was paid to disappear. It was all a lie, orchestrated by Beatrice. She stared at him, her expression a mixture of contempt and disbelief. Beatrice? Your devoted, saintly cousin? Of course. How simple. You grow tired of your second wife, so you invent a conspiracy and blame her for the sins of your first. You dukes are all alike. You believe the world can be rearranged to suit your whims. It is the truth. He took another step, his hands outstretched. I have proof. My solicitor is gathering it now. Handwriting analysis, witness statements. The groom, Rory, has been found. He confessed he was paid by Beatrice's man of affairs. She flinched away from his outstretched hands as if they were white-hot. Do not touch me. Your proof means nothing to me. Your world means nothing to me. This, she gestured around her, at the tiny cottage, the laundry line, the gray sea beyond. This is my world. I built it. I earned it. It is real, and you will not take it from me. The raw strength in her, the fierce independence, was something he had never seen before. He had married a Duchess, a beautiful, polished ornament for his title. He had found a survivor, a woman of iron and fire. He felt a surge of admiration so profound it bordered on awe, and it was mingled with the deepest shame of his life. He had done this to her. He had forced her to become this person by his own blindness and cruelty. The boy, he said, his voice dropping. Finn, he is my son. It was not a question. It was a statement of a truth so absolute it resonated in his bones. Her face, which had been a mask of fury, crumpled. For a moment, he saw a flash of the old Elara, the vulnerable woman he had failed to protect. A single tear escaped and traced a path through the grime on her cheek. He is my son, she whispered, her voice fierce and protective. He has nothing to do with you. You have no claim on him. He has my eyes, Alistair said softly. I have a right. You have no rights, she cried, her voice breaking. Where were your rights when I was alone, pregnant, and running for my life? Where were your rights when I was scrubbing floors on my hands and knees to keep him from starving? You forfeited your rights when you chose to believe I was a whore. He is mine. You will not have him. The finality in her voice was like a door slamming shut in his face. He saw then the true depth of the chasm between them. It was not just a matter of proving the truth about the past. It was a matter of earning the right to even stand in her present. He looked at the cottage, at her worn dress, at her chapped hands. He had come here as a duke, expecting to reclaim his Duchess. He had expected tears, accusations, and then, eventually, a return to the life they had lost. He had been a fool. He could not command her forgiveness. He could not buy her trust. He had to earn it. I am not leaving, he said, his voice quiet but firm. She stared at him, confused. What? I am not leaving Saltwick, he repeated. Not until you believe me. Not until you understand. You cannot stay here, she said, a note of panic entering her voice again. You are the Duke of Blackwood. What will you do here? Reside at the anchor and critique the quality of the fish? If I must, he replied. He looked down at his own hands, soft and uncalloused. He had never done a day of honest labor in his life. I will not force you to do anything, Elara. I will not try to take Finn. but I will not abandon you again, even if you want me to." He turned and walked away, back toward the inn, leaving her standing alone by her fallen laundry, her face a storm of conflicting emotions. He could feel her eyes on his back, a mixture of hatred, fear, and a tiny, reluctant flicker of something else, something he knew he did not yet deserve. Alistair did not stay in the private parlor at the inn. He took a small, single room at the back, one usually reserved for traveling merchants. It was cold, the floor was bare, and the window looked out onto a brick wall. His valet was scandalized, but Alistair was resolute. He was not here as a duke. He was here as a penitent. His days fell into a strange, new rhythm. He sent his valet back to London with a list of instructions for Gable, demanding daily progress reports via courier. Then he was left alone. He walked the cliffs, letting the harsh wind scour his thoughts. He watched the fishing boats go out at dawn and return at dusk, their nets heavy with writhing silver. He saw the hard, relentless labor that defined life in this village, a universe away from the leisurely, ritualized existence he had always known. He saw Alara. He did not approach her. He kept his distance, a silent, watchful presence at the edge of her world. He saw her carry heavy baskets of laundry to and from the larger houses. He saw her haggling for fish at the docks. He saw her in the evenings, through the small, glowing window of her cottage, reading to Finn by the light of a single lamp. Each sighting was a fresh torment. He saw her strength and her weariness, and knew he was the cause of both. He began to understand that his crime was not merely believing a lie. His crime was that he had never truly seen her at all. He had seen the Duchess of Blackwood, the beautiful woman who secured his lineage. He had never seen Alara, the person. One afternoon, he saw her struggling to carry a heavy load of firewood she had gathered from the sparse woods inland. Her arms were trembling with the strain, her face pale with exhaustion. Every instinct screamed at him to rush to her side, to take the load from her, but he remembered the look in her eyes, the way she had flinched from his touch. He could not help her as a duke. He had to find another way. That night, long after the village was dark and silent, he left the inn. He went to the woodpile behind the innkeeper's tavern, where a great stack of logs was kept for the winter. For the next hour, in the biting cold, Alistair Beaumont, the 9th Duke of Blackwood, hauled logs from the inn to the small woodshed behind Alara's cottage. He worked until his muscles screamed and his soft hands were raw and splintered. He stacked the wood neatly, a silent offering in the dark. He returned to his room, his body aching, and fell into the first truly deep sleep he had known in years. The next day, he watched from a distance as she discovered the wood. He saw her stop, her hand flying to her mouth. He saw her look around, her eyes searching the empty lane. He saw the confusion on her face, the flicker of suspicion, and then a dawning, reluctant understanding. She did not reject the gift. She took a few logs inside, her movements slow and deliberate. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. He continued his silent campaign. A sack of potatoes from a local farm appeared on her doorstep. A new, sturdy pair of boots for Finn, left in a box by the gate. He paid the innkeeper's wife, Martha, to deliver a basket of goods each week, telling her to say it was from the parish, a lie Martha saw through immediately, but agreed to with a knowing look. He was courting her, not with jewels and sonnets, but with firewood and vegetables. He was trying to show her, in the only language that now mattered, that he saw her hardship and he wished to ease it. He was not trying to buy her forgiveness, but to demonstrate his own transformation. A courier arrived from London with a thick packet from Mr. Gable. Alistair locked himself in his room and read the contents. Gable had been ruthlessly efficient. He had found Rory, the groom, living in squalor in Ireland. Faced with the Duke's wrath and the promise of a comfortable annuity for his testimony, he had confessed everything. He had never touched the Duchess. He had been paid £200 by a man he knew only as the Baron. a known associate of Beatrice's late husband. The report from the handwriting expert was even more damning. The love letters were clumsy forgeries. The script shared numerous, unmistakable characteristics with samples of Beatrice's own handwriting, taken from household account books. The stationery had been purchased from a small shop in a town where Beatrice had been visiting her ailing aunt, a month before Alara's disappearance. The web was complete. The evidence was irrefutable. Alistair sat with the paper spread before him, a cold, precise fury building in his chest. Beatrice had not just lied. She had systematically destroyed a life, stolen a child from his mother, and condemned Alara to 5 years of poverty and fear. All for a title, for the cold, empty prize of being the Duchess of Blackwood. He penned a short, brutal letter to his solicitor. He instructed Gable to begin proceedings to have his marriage to Beatrice annulled on the grounds of fraud. He further instructed him to present the evidence of the conspiracy to the authorities. Beatrice would not just be cast out, she would be ruined, socially and, if the law found its teeth, legally. His final instruction was for Gable to bring the groom, Rory, and the handwriting expert to Saltwick. He needed more than paper evidence. He needed living, breathing proof. He sealed the letter and then did something he had not done since he arrived. He walked directly to the blue door at the end of Cliff Lane and knocked. Alara opened it. She was holding a wet cloth, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. When she saw him, her body tensed. Finn peeked out from behind her legs, his blue eyes wide. "I need to speak with you," Alistair said, his voice quiet but firm. He held up the packet of documents. "I have the proof." She hesitated, her gaze flickering between his face and the papers in his hand. "I am working." "This is more important than laundry," he said. The words were blunt, but not unkind. She looked at him for a long moment, then stepped back, allowing him to enter. The inside of the cottage was tiny, just one main room that served as kitchen, parlor, and laundry. It was spotlessly clean but starkly poor. A small fire crackled in the hearth. The air smelled of soap and wood smoke. It smelled like a home. He laid the documents out on the small, scrubbed wooden table. He did not speak. He simply let her read. He watched as her eyes scanned the solicitor's report, the expert's analysis, the transcript of the groom's confession. He saw her initial skepticism give way to a stunned, horrified understanding. Her face grew pale, and her hand, the one not holding Finn's, trembled. She read for a long time, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the whisper of the wind outside. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with a terrible, dawning clarity. "She did all this," she whispered, her voice choked. "All of it." "Yes," Alistair said. "Just to have you? To have the title?" "Yes." She sank onto a small stool, the papers slipping from her grasp. She covered her face with her hands, and her shoulders began to shake. He heard the sound he had both dreaded and longed for, the sound of her grief. Not the angry, bitter grief of a wronged woman, but the deep, sorrowful grief for the life that had been stolen from her. He wanted to go to her, to hold her, to offer comfort. But he held himself back. He had not earned that right. He stood by the table, a helpless witness to the pain he had allowed to happen. Finn, seeing his mother's distress, began to cry. He tugged on her dress. "Mama? What is it, Mama?" Alara took a shuddering breath and gathered her son into her arms, holding him tight, her face buried in his dark hair. She was anchoring herself to the one pure, good thing in her life. Alistair knelt, not before her, but before his son. "Finn," he said softly. The boy looked at him over his mother's shoulder, his tear-stained face a mirror of Alistair's own. "I am your father," Alistair said, the words feeling both monumental and terrifyingly simple. "I did not know you existed. If I had known, I would have searched the ends of the earth for you, for both of you." Alara's sobbing quieted. She slowly raised her head, her eyes red and swollen, and looked at him. She saw not a duke demanding his rights, but a man on his knees, his face etched with a regret so profound it was almost a physical deformity. "I failed you, Alara," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "My pride, my blindness, I failed you, and I have spent 5 years in a prison of my own making, a colder, emptier prison than you can ever imagine. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I know I have not earned it. I am only asking you to believe me, to believe that I see the truth now." He did not wait for an answer. He rose, gathered the scattered papers, and placed them back on the table. "Mr. Gable is bringing the witnesses here, to Saltwick, so you can hear it from their own lips, so there can be no doubt." He turned and walked to the door. His hand was on the latch when her voice, small and fragile, stopped him. "The wood," she said, "and the potatoes. That was you." He paused, his back to her. "Yes." "Why?" He turned to face her. "Because my words are meaningless. They are the words of the man who abandoned you. I hoped my actions might begin to speak for the man I want to become." He left, closing the door softly behind him, leaving her in the quiet of her small cottage with the wreckage of the past laid bare on her table. The arrival of a London solicitor, a nervous handwriting expert, and a shamefaced groom caused a stir in Saltwick. Alistair installed them at the inn and arranged for the meeting to take place in the private parlor. He sent a note to Alara, a simple request for her to attend. He did not know if she would come. He waited, the ticking of the clock in the parlor measuring out his anxiety. Gable sat opposite him, impassive. The 2 witnesses sat by the window, staring out at the gray sea, united in their misery. The door opened. Alara stood there. She was wearing her best dress, a simple dark wool that was mended at the cuffs. Her hair was neatly coiled. She looked not like a duchess, nor a laundress, but like a woman coming to claim her own history. She did not look at Alistair. Her gaze was fixed on the groom, Rory. The man flinched and could not meet her eyes. "Tell me," she said, her voice clear and cold. And so the story was told again, by the man who took the money, by the expert who analyzed the ink and paper, by the solicitor who laid out the timeline of deceit with chilling precision. Alara listened without interruption, her face a pale, unreadable mask. When it was over, she stood. "Thank you, Mr. Gable. You have been very thorough." She finally turned her eyes to Alistair. The fury was gone. The hatred was gone. In their place was a vast, weary emptiness. "You have your proof. Your name is cleared. You may return to your life, Your Grace." "My life is here," he said, "with you, with our sons." A sad, tired smile touched her lips. "You have a son at Blackwood, Thomas. He needs his father. My son needs his mother. Our lives are separate. You have proven my innocence, and for that I am grateful. You have exposed Beatrice, and for that I am satisfied. But you cannot erase the last 5 years. You cannot give me back the time, or the trust you threw away." She turned to leave. "No," Alistair said, his voice ringing with a desperation that startled everyone in the room. He moved to stand in front of the door, blocking her path. "I will not accept that." "You have no choice," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I do. I can choose to fight. Not to fight you, but to fight for you, for us." He reached into his coat and his hand closed around the small, velvet box he had carried with him since the day he left Blackwood. He held it out to her. "I am not the man who gave you this ring. That man was an arrogant fool who prized his title above his wife. I am asking you to give the man I am now a chance to earn the right for you to wear it again." She stared at the box, her breath catching. "I love you, Alara," he said, the words raw and true, stripped of all artifice. "I think I loved you then, but I was too blind and stupid to know what it meant. I know now. Love is not possession. It is not duty. It is firewood on a cold night. It is wanting to shoulder another's burdens. It is seeing someone for who they truly are, and vowing to protect them. I vow to protect you, and Finn, and Thomas. I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you, if you will let me. Tears streamed down her face, silent and unchecked. They were not tears of grief, but of a slow, painful thawing. I am afraid, she whispered. So am I, he confessed. I am terrified you will say no, but I will still be here tomorrow, and the day after that, for as long as it takes. She looked from his face, to the box in his hand, to the door he was blocking. She was trapped again, but this time it was not by walls of stone and lies, but by a love so fierce and determined it was as relentless as the sea outside. She slowly reached out and took the box. She did not open it. She just held it in her hand, the worn velvet a stark contrast to her calloused skin. Go home, Alistair, she said softly. Go home to Blackwood. Settle your affairs. Deal with her. Be a father to your son. And when you are done, then we will see. It was not a yes, but it was not a no. It was a sliver of hope. And for Alistair, it was everything. The downfall of Beatrice, the once Duchess of Blackwood, was swift and absolute. Faced with Gable's irrefutable evidence and the threat of public prosecution, she crumbled. Her marriage was annulled. Her name was mud. Society, which had once fawned over her, turned its back with brutal efficiency. She fled to the continent, a disgraced woman with a tarnished name and a fraction of the wealth she had schemed for, condemned to a life of bitter obscurity. Alistair returned to a Blackwood that felt both the same and entirely different. The oppressive silence was still there, but now he understood its source. He spent his days with Thomas, truly with him for the first time. He talked to him not as a duke to his heir, but as a father to his son. He told him everything, about Alara, about the lies, about Finn. He told him of his own failures, laying his soul bare before his child. Thomas, in his quiet, watchful way, listened. So, I have a brother, he said when Alistair had finished, his voice full of wonder. And mother is coming home. I hope so, Thomas, Alistair said. I very much hope so. He did not command Alara's return. He wrote to her, long letters, not of demand or expectation, but of his days. He told her about Thomas, about the running of the estate, about the small changes he was making. He told her about his thoughts, his fears, his hopes. He courted her with ink and paper, bearing the heart she was so afraid to trust. She wrote back. Her letters were short at first, cautious and practical. She wrote of Finn, of the changing seasons in Saltwick, of Martha the innkeeper's wife. But slowly, her letters grew longer. She asked about Thomas. She told him a funny story about something Finn had said. She shared a memory of their early days together, a fragile bud of sentiment pushing through the frozen ground of her pain. Finally, after 2 months of correspondence, a letter arrived with a single sentence. We are ready to come home. Alistair did not send a carriage. He went himself. He stood once more before the small cottage with the blue door. This time, when Alara opened it, she was smiling. A small, cautious smile, but a smile nonetheless. Finn stood beside her, holding her hand, looking at Alistair not with fear, but with a shy curiosity. He held out his hand. Shall we? She took it. Her hand was still rough, but it was warm in his. Their return to Blackwood was quiet. There was no grand announcement, no triumphant procession. Alara stepped across the threshold, not as a reclaimed possession, but as the mistress of the house, returning on her own terms. The first meeting between the two brothers was a moment of quiet magic. Thomas, so often solemn and old for his years, looked at the small, boisterous boy with wide eyes. Finn, unafraid, walked right up to him and poked him in the ribs. "You look like father," he declared. Thomas broke into a rare, bright grin. "So do you." That evening, the four of them had dinner together in the vast, formal dining room. The silence was gone. It was replaced by Finn's chatter, by Thomas's quiet questions, by the soft laughter of their parents. Later, when the boys were asleep, Alistair found Alara in her old rooms. She had not moved back into the Duke's chambers. She had reclaimed her own space, a statement of independence he understood and respected. She was standing by the window, looking out at the moonlit gardens. He came to stand beside her. For a long time, they just stood in comfortable silence. "It feels strange," she said, "to be here again." "Is it a good strange or a bad strange?" he asked. "Just strange," she said. She turned to him. "I am still afraid, Alistair." "I know," he said. "I will spend my life helping you not to be." He reached into his pocket and took out the small velvet box. He had carried it with him every day. He opened it. The simple gold band gleamed in the moonlight. "I believe this belongs to you, if you'll have it." She looked at the ring, then at his face. She saw the love, the patience, the deep, abiding remorse. She saw the man who had hauled firewood in the dark and waited for her to be ready. She slowly held out her left hand. Alistair's own hands trembled as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. It was home. She curled her fingers around his. "It is a new beginning, Alistair, not a return to the past." "A new beginning," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. He drew her into his arms, and for the first time she did not stiffen. She relaxed against him, her head resting on his chest. He held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his. The gilded cage had become a home. The silence had become peace. And the Duke of Blackwood was, at long last, finally whole,